Hi, I'm Ricky Frank. I'm an enamelist, I make enamel jewelry, and I teach enameling. I'd like to show you how to make your own custom sifter. Here are the supplies I'm going to need for making my own custom sifter. This is what the custom sifter is going to look like. This is the lid to a spray paint can. I've cut out the center and fused some screen onto it. Here is what I'll use. I've got a piece of stainless steel screen. This piece is 325 mesh. You can buy these at different mesh sizes and make lots of different type sifters. For my cups, I've got several different types of containers. I've got a piece of PVC connector here. This is already with a hole on either end. This is the lid to a butane gas container, and I've taken an X-Acto knife and cut out the center. This is a plastic jar with a lid, and I've sawed out the center. I'm going to use a pair of snips to cut my screen. I'm going to use a trowel to bond the mesh to my cups, and I'm going to use a torch to heat my trowel. I'm also going to use a pair of safety glasses while I'm using my torch, and I've got an electronic igniter to light my torch. Let's make our sifter. First thing I'm going to do is cut a piece of mesh that's going to be a little bit bigger than my cup. So I'm going to put this on top of there, and I'm going to take a Sharpie and just draw a line that's a little bigger. I'm going to take my shears and cut it out. It doesn't have to be precise. I just want to make sure it's going to be bigger than the cup. Doesn't matter if it's all round or all square. I'm going to check it and make sure it's going to fit. Now I'm going to place it over the opening. Now this has a little bit of a rim here, so I'm going to weld it onto the rim. I'm not going to try to weld it onto this wall here. So I'm going to place that right there, and it's curling up a little bit, so I think I'll turn it this way so it'll be easier to control when I'm heating it. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to heat my trowel and gently press the trowel onto the screen, and it will start to melt my plastic and it will seal this in place. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to light my torch. It doesn't need to be a hot flame. I don't want to get this too hot. I'm going to heat the trowel slightly. And let's see if it's hot enough. Here we go. We can see that dark line is where it's melted. And I'm not putting a lot of pressure on. I'm just doing it very gently. And I'm just going to give it a few seconds to cool. And I'm going to take my snips and trim it. It doesn't have to be perfectly close. I can always come back and trim it up a little bit more later. And there is my custom sifter. Why might I want to have a custom sifter? Let's take some enamel and put that into several different sifters. I've got a regular commercial sifter here. I've got a handmade sifter, which is about 200 mesh here. And I've got a handmade sifter, which is 325 mesh. So this has the biggest holes, this has the next biggest holes, and this has the smallest holes. So when I sift through each of these, I'm going to get different size grains of enamel falling onto my pieces. I've got 3 different pieces that I've already fired enamel onto. So this is copper with a white base. I've got a jar of opaque 1850 pumpkin orange. This is an unleaded opaque enamel made by Thompson Enamel. I've got a piece of paper that I'm going to use for sifting. I've got a dust mask I'm going to use. Even though the enamel's unleaded, I don't want to be breathing glass, so I want to have a dust mask on. And I've got a sgraffito tool that I've made. This is basically a paintbrush that I've put into a pencil sharpener to give myself a nice sharp wooden point. So what I will be demonstrating is how does the different grain size with each sifter affect what I can do design-wise. So let's begin. I'm going to put a little bit of enamel into each sifter. And I'm going to move these out of the way so I have plenty of room. I'm going to take my piece and I'm going to gently sift a layer. So the first thing I noticed when I started to sift was how quickly it came out. It felt like I had no control. And if we look here on the edges, what we see is the grains bounced off the edge and left a white rim around the outside. And that happened because the grains were so heavy, they didn't have any cushioning, and they just fell off the edge. So we're going to put that to the side. Let's take our next one. This was a 200 mesh sifter. And I'm going to sift. And notice how much more gently the enamel's coming out and how it covers the piece right to the sides. So I'm going to put this one to the side. And let's take the 325 mesh sifter. And notice how it's hardly coming through. So what's happening is just the very, very fine grains are falling through the sifter. So that's not very helpful for this type of piece unless I want that type of look, which might be very interesting. So let's just take my sgraffito tool and draw through here. I'm going to put my finger here just to brace it. And I'm getting really sharp lines because the grains are so small. And if I want to take my brush, I can just play a little bit. I can actually just move it around, and it's almost like finger painting with a brush. And because there's so little enamel on here, it's really easy to manipulate and create whatever kind of line I want here. So I can make it a little thicker, I can make it very thin because I've got these very fine grains of enamel. Okay, so let's go ahead and just flick out some of this. Very easy to create imagery like that. So let's do a similar design on this piece. This is the one that's got the 200 mesh enamel, and I'm just going to make a little squiggle pattern here. And what I'm seeing is a fairly crisp line, and I've got a full cover as opposed to the slight cover that I had on here. Let's take my brush and just brush away part of it and see what kind of edge I can get. I like thinking about the concept of edge because there are lots of different ways to create an edge. The edge can be made between a background layer and a new layer, or the edge can be made between two different colors on the same layer. The finer the grain, the smaller the size, the crisper line I'm going to be able to get, and I'll have a crisper edge. Let's do one down here. Now, one thing I like about using the finer grains is it allows me both to get a crisp edge and to have some enamel that is just slightly laying on the surface. It kind of gives it a shaded effect. So even though this is an opaque enamel, it's going to give the illusion of some depth in this image. The bigger the grain for this, the less able I'll be to go from a solid layer to almost nothing because the grains here would be too big. So having these small grains is allowing me to get a nice shading with my brush. Let's try the same thing on this piece. So I'm going to do my little pattern, and as you can see, because I've got more enamel on here because the enamel came out of the sifter so quickly, I've got nice big edges along here. Really, I've got nice big walls where I scratched through. So let's try to do the same thing and see what happens. And it's going to be trickier to get a crisp line here because I've got these big grains that are next to each other, and it looks like there are little bumps in between each one. It's also more difficult to take this enamel and shade it because it doesn't go from dark to light like it does on this one. It looks like big grains here and big grains here, as opposed to this where it looks like it's actually fading into the background here. So these are just some of the ways that I can use different types of meshes to create different looks. The important thing to think about is that there's not a right way. This is not any worse than this, and this is not any better than this. They're just different. So what I want to think about is the basic, simple idea of applying enamel to a piece with a sifter means I'm putting the enamel into a cup, and it's falling through the screen onto my piece. That is sifting 101. But now if I want to become an artist with it, I'm thinking about what is the result when I try different things? What happens when I sift it thick or thin? What happens when I used a finer mesh or a very finer mesh? It gives me a different look, it gives me different imagery, and it allows me to be more fluent with my enamel, which means that my vocabulary, the type of image I can make, has much more variety when I'm making my own sifters. I hope this video was helpful. If you have any more questions, please contact us.